talking about peer production and production in social networks. How is this theory really different from other theories that deal with organizational models between markets and hierarchy, like all sorts of networks that people cooperate in, which are not really a firm, not really a market, like resource and development, joint ventures, global sourcing, etc., etc., even brand alliances. What is the key difference? And the second question, maybe you can put that also in. Can you imagine other goods than media being produced in this way? Because it sounds like a really generalized economic theory, but the examples only, or I think until now, come from the world of the media, from news production, etc.
That's a really deep question. The various approaches towards network organization have dealt with modifications of traditional firm relations, but they remain relations among more or less formal economic actors. But change the degree of separation between suppliers and customers, between firms that are within a network of firms, or they might emphasize work within an organization and knowledge sharing within an organization. The critical difference with regard to peer production, with commons-based peer production, is that the network is first and foremost a formal network. It permeates firm boundaries, but it also permeates the very idea of a particular economic process with a particular outcome that necessarily has to have some moment of monetization. Instead, what you have is a new and unusual mixture of social motivations and social relations that are themselves intended for purposes of social engagement, interfacing sometimes, not always, but interfacing with firms that do have an interest in monetization, with individuals who are in the intermediate position between wanting to do something for social purposes but wanting to find enough of an income to be able to just do it. So that, and the effect of that is that the design of the relationship has to tend to the social architecture of the relationship, rather than constructing the relationships purely around the production. And that means that the presence of money poses a trickier design problem. But that means, on the other hand, that harnessing the intrinsic motivations to the goal of the enterprise is easier. And so there are advantages and disadvantages or difficulties of different forms coming out of the fact that this is intrinsically a social process that has economic effect, and not an economic process as understood in its first instance by a large number of the participants. Now you ask me, where else other than in information production and exchange this can happen? There are two different ways of answering this. The first one is there are a lot of material production processes where the critical problem is an information problem, even though the outputs are material. So you're beginning to see today, for example, people working on agricultural innovation and agronomic innovation by trying to get together scientists, farmers, agronomists in various national areas, being able to cooperate on learning how to improve their techniques. So is that outside of information production? It's food production, But the critical thing that is happening, or that people are trying to build platforms for cooperation on, is on the information side, on the learning side. I think you're beginning to see companies doing internally whatever else they're producing, trying to solve their internal knowledge management problems through setting up social software. So that's one kind of answer, which is there's a lot of information production or innovation that is central to material production, and we're beginning to see some of it. The other major dimension that we're seeing is in the sharing of shareable goods. When you look at distributed computing, when you look at wireless mesh networks, when you look at distributed storage and peer-to-peer networks, this is, in some senses, again, in the information system. All of this is in information and computation, but it's not information. It's not economically a public good that's being shared. It's a physical resource that actually you could put your computation into SETI, or you could put your computation into climate prediction, but you can't do it necessarily both. Or if you can do both, you can't do AIDS drug discovery. So these are rival goods, and yet we see major sharing activities occurring. And so I've spent some time looking at the economics of these, and these are shareable goods, as I call them, which is to say goods that are widely distributed in the population, but they come in chunks, so that they have more capacity than the individual user needs, and so that excess capacity becomes available for the same kinds of motivations and the same kinds of structures as the excess capacity in time and attention that we have, that we put into peer production. So I've written, for example, about how the practices of carpooling, sharing cars in the United States, are very much a form of sharing of material resources on a very large scale. It's the second largest commuter transportation system in the United States. The biggest part is people using their cars by themselves. The second is people sharing their cars with their neighbors, not selling rides, not taxis, but sharing cars. Much more common than taking trains or buses or subways. So again, because you have a car, it has 4 seats. If you're going from point A to point B, there will be those other 4 seats, or 3 seats, or however many there are. They're going to come with you whether or not you use them for others. And what people have done is, instead of setting up a market system of who will pay me more to take you to work, they've set up a sharing system. And so I think the direction for research for discovering material sharing conditions, the next step is to begin to look for more shareable goods with these characteristics, and those are places that are potential serious targets for sharing in the material world, as well as instances where innovation is central to material processes.